So how do we use this thing? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and for time, I'm going to go into my registration controller that I had before. Can't do that. And I'm going to create a, actually let's do it this way. So if I go back to my page, and I go to registration, right now I get a dump of everything. So this is just another way of doing the same results. Actually, this will be a slightly more complex way. So right now I've got name, description, capacity, and root, all 4 columns showing up, and I'm giving you a result set grid. What I'd like to do is I'd like to filter this grid based on what I type. So if I only want the ones that start with J, I have a little search box, I type J, and then boom, it filters just to the one with J. Nice, right? So how do we make that happen? So the first thing is we have to go to our view. Oops. And at the very top here, I'm going to say html.textbox. And I'm just going to put the name of search. Alright? And maybe we'll put a little string up here that says search. If I go back and refresh, I get a box. Nothing fancy. So when I type into that box, that's when I want something to happen. So I have this table, and I'm going to give it an ID. So when you interact with objects in JavaScript, or you're interacting with objects within your page, you're interacting with what's called the DOM, or Document Object Model. Familiar with that concept? All right. So in order to interact with things, you can interact with them in one of 3 ways, or a mix of them. You can interact with elements. Your elements are the names that exist at the beginning of your angle bracket. So that's things like label, div, span, input, okay, form. What that does is it does a global search of the entire document. And it searches for any tag that matches that element. So that works well for unique items, like the body. Typically your web page only has 1 body tag. It doesn't work so well for things like IMG or image tags. You may have a lot of them. Maybe you want all the images, so I don't know. Depends on the case. In our case, we're looking for the table. Well, there may be more than 1 table on here, right? Potentially. So instead, you can go 1 layer deeper, and you can actually call on things by their CSS class name. Does this object contain this class? Well, this table has a class called table, so we could call on that. But again, if we have more than 1 table, we'll get back all the tables, which is not what I want. I want this table only. So the third option is to give the element an ID, an identifier. Actually, you can also do it on name, but name is also ambiguous because you can have more than 1. So, anyway, ID. So I'm going to call this my registration table. Now, the IDs by standard should only be, they should be unique and only identified once within an entire document. So you shouldn't have two elements in the same document that have the same ID. All right? So now I can uniquely identify this table every time as registration table. All right. The next thing I want to check for myself is that I have jQuery inside of my project. So to do that, I'm going to go to the scripts, and you'll see all this jQuery-ness going on in here. I won't get into it, but as long as it's there, you're in good shape. If it's not there, you can go right-click References, Manage NuGet Packages. You'll come up with this fancy search. You come over here and you type jQuery. Hit Enter. And it should be the first one or close to the first one to the top there, and it'll just say jQuery. And you click install. I think this is a newer version than what I have installed, but it's not important to me. As long as I have jQuery installed, I'm happy. There's also jQuery UI, jQuery validation. There's all kinds of jQuery libraries, but the one that I'm interested in is just the straight jQuery. And the reason I'm going to show you that is that jQuery, just for a real quick explanation, is basically a JavaScript abstraction, a framework abstraction. So you can write straight JavaScript. There's nothing wrong with doing it. It's actually more efficient to write straight JavaScript than to use jQuery. I've read in places that it's the assembly language of the web, so take that for what it's worth, but I think it's a pretty good analogy. Basically, it's the subsystem API or language that you can use to interact with your website. jQuery is an abstraction that sits on top of that because how many browsers do we have out there in the world? Hundreds. Most of them are based off of one of 5 primary browsers: Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, or Opera. Well, Netscape is part of Firefox. It's all part underneath the Mozilla umbrella. So, and I feel like Opera took WebKit, so that kind of falls underneath that Chrome, Safari thing. Anyway, so I won't name names, but 3 of them like to follow the standards, and 1 of them doesn't. And for the guy who doesn't like to follow the standards, we had to make some commonalities. So jQuery works to try to do that. It says we're going to write one API that you use universally, and then jQuery will decide if you're one of those 3 guys or the 4th guy, and then we'll choose which APIs to call. So, is it terribly slow to use jQuery? No. The guys have done a very good job at making it fairly efficient. But if you do high-performance benchmarking between the 2, you'll notice that there's significant slowness, depending on how you use jQuery. And just like anything else, you can do good jQuery and you can do bad jQuery. But we're going to utilize jQuery just because it's the more effective way to do it. Again, we could write it in JavaScript, but it would probably take 2 or 3 times as long, and we'd have to write a lot of edge case code. All right, so jQuery is installed. It's part of our project. The last place I want to check is that under Views, Layout. So I'm going Views, Shared, _ Layout. I'm going to cruise down to the bottom, and I want to make sure that this script render bundles / jQuery is there. It should be. It comes stock if you use the default template. So that should be in good shape. If for some reason it isn't, come see me and we'll work on wiring it all in there. And basically what that's doing is it's including jQuery in your project. Alright, so we've got our registration table, we have our search box, so let's start doing some JavaScript. Now, if you don't know this, your JavaScript, actually all JavaScript, but your JavaScript in particular, should be the last thing on your web page. Does anybody know why?
Loads faster. It loads faster, the web page, because JavaScript will slow down.
It does, but your rationale isn't wrong, but I don't think it's clear. You got that better?
It's at the end, so I can grab the elements from the page. So if it's before it, the elements don't exist yet.
Yes, but there are ways around that, but that is one of the scenarios. So it does make it load faster. It has to grab the elements. I heard somebody else.
You don't want your JavaScript firing while your page is loading.
Right, you don't want your JavaScript firing while your page is loading. That's kind of parallels that idea. So yes. The other thing is, and this is the primary reason, it speaks to all of these, is that if you put your JavaScript at the top of the page, let's say you're just pulling down a JS file, that is a blocking action inside of pretty much every browser. So if your first line of HTML inside your header is download this JavaScript and run this, like it's not just loading functions, but it's actually doing things, it will actually stop rendering and downloading all the other elements on the page. It is literally a blocking action that will cause all those other downloads that we saw earlier from the Apple website. It will literally say, stop, got to download JavaScript and process it, and then it goes on to do the rest of the download. So if you don't put it at the end, all the images and style sheets and all the elements that you would utilize don't get loaded, and if that JavaScript is trying to reference them, then you run into the cases of breaking your JavaScript, page not loading, page loading very slowly. So all of those things bundled together are the reason why you try to shove it to the end. It doesn't always happen. There's cases where you just can't, but that's your best case scenario. Now, to do that, we have this special thing called a section inside of ASP.NET MVC. And the purpose of a section is so that we can carve out within this view. Because if you remember, this view is just that content piece of your page that gets loaded in the middle. And you want to get that script to the bottom. So we actually carve out sections, or we have sessions identified in our layout. Down here at the bottom. See this render section? Scripts. Right before the end of the body. That is where this snippet of code will go. This gets plucked out of this view and gets shoved into the bottom of this layout. And then all of that gets shipped off to the client, to their browser, and then gets rendered. So what we're going to do here is a few things. So this will be jQuery in 1 minute or less. jQuery can be accessed within your page in one of two ways. You use the keyword jQuery, lowercase j, uppercase q, jQuery, or $. I won't go into all the mechanics, but basically they both work unless you have some other sort of JavaScript framework loaded at the same time, such as Prototype. Just put that in the back of your head. You may run into it sometime in your life. Prototype also overrides the $ symbol, and therefore you have to go into a, what do they call that? I forget it. Basically, you set jQuery into a mode where it's not uncolliding. It doesn't collide with Prototype or anything else that may override or use those tokens, those keywords. So the $, 99% of the time, 100% of the time if you're writing your own code, is the way that you would access jQuery. So jQuery itself relies on function calls. So everything you do inside of jQuery, for the most part, is a function. And sometimes it's passing functions to functions, and sometimes it's passing JSON to functions, sometimes it's dealing with strings, passing those to functions. A whole lot of functions. So to select an element, you do $, parentheses, quotes. The quotes is where you put your selector. So I want to select two things here. First thing I want to select, so I'm going to create a variable, is my search box. And the # is how you identify something by its ID. Case sensitive are the strings. Oh, I forgot, I got to do script tags here. Script. There's my pretty colors. If I want to be real specific, talking about efficient jQuery, you put the element and the selector. So then I'll say var reg table equals $, table pound registration table. So what that does for me is it gives me back two objects, two jQuery objects, one for the search box and one for the table. Okay? And what I want to have happen is I want to wire up to this typing event within the text box. Now to do that, it's similar to if you think back, I don't know how it really worked in Java, I don't remember. But if you think back to your contemporary programming C# course, you always had event handlers for your form buttons and things like that. We're basically creating that same type of wheel. We do that by saying jQuery object dot on, and then we put in a string of the event that we want to handle. And in this case, we will handle, what do we want to handle? Huh?
On text change.
Yeah, let's handle the. My concern is that every time you type something into the box, does text change only trigger when you lose focus on the box?
I thought there was one that was like on. There's like on text change, like on text change.
that's just for.
I don't remember. All right, let's do this. Let's add another element up here just for lack of confusion.
Yeah, I think it's every time you look at a button. On blurs when you leave the text.
I know, but I don't want to necessarily have to leave the box. That was my concern. And I can do like triggers and timeouts and all kinds of stuff to do like on key press, but then that's going to just take a whole lot longer. So I could just handle the enter button. Maybe we'll do that in the text box when you hit enter. Let's just do that. Then I don't have to put a button in. All right. So we'll do on key down. So key down is the event that we're going to handle. And I may have to look up some documentation. I don't remember. I think there's one event. Yeah, we'll figure it out. All right, so that's the event I want to handle. Now, in C# on your web or your Windows forms, you always had a function that was your event handling. JavaScript, you actually have to create a function, and that a function is passed as a delegate. So what we do here is we say event to handle, comma, and then we put a function that we want to get called when the key down event occurs. So we'll say function, and I'm going to put event as my parameter. And I'll explain that part in a minute. But basically what event is it's the event information that occurred on that key down. So whenever key down happens, an event gets called. So I'm going to start out by just doing alert. Key down. All right, simple. So leave that there, flip back. So now remember, I'm only updating the view. So updating the view, I don't have to rebuild. So I'm going to refresh the page. So now when I type a key, I'm getting an alert. Key down. Key down. All right? Why am I doing it? I'm showing that my event handler is wired up correctly. So if I had mistyped something, I refresh the page here, I would type in this box. Oh, look at me. Wait a minute, something's hung up here. Yeah, then nothing would happen. So I'm just simply testing to make sure that when I push a key, I'm capturing that event. Because the goal is when I push the key, I call the web service, and I get back the results of those sessions. So now the next step is, am I able to capture what's in the box? So I'll alert search box.value. I think it's just val. So on every key press, I want to pop up what's currently in the box. Interesting. Did you notice that it's behind? All right, so the issue is that we're using the wrong event. So what did I hear? Text change?
It's just
Change. All right, so let's change our event. Yes, thank you. So change doesn't work. I was going to go with key up. Okay, so key up is the event we want because we want to capture what's currently in the box. Key down, the character doesn't actually get rendered in the box until your finger comes up off the key. So because of that, pressing the key triggers the event, but it doesn't capture the character being pressed. So we want the character we want to include the character in the press. So we have to do key up. Thank you. All right. So now we only want to trigger this to happen when we press enter. And that I don't know. All right, somebody go out to jQuery, look up the events object, and tell me what the property is. The property for the key that's pressed on like a text chain. Is it key code? Yep, that works. All right, thank you. So event captures the event data of the key up. Key code is the property that contains the current key. That key code value comes in as an ASCII. So if you go to ASCIItable.com, you'll see all the characters and their corresponding ASCII numeric values. 13 is the enter key. I just know that from experience. So what I'm saying here is if you push enter, I want two things to happen. If you push something else, right now I'm just telling you push something else. Eventually we'll get rid of the else. It's just there to make sure that we're only capturing the enter. So first thing it says is you pressed enter. The second thing it does is it prevents the default action. So if you go into a box typically and you push enter on a web page, what will happen is that it will attempt to submit whatever form that button or that cursor is in scope of. So if I pushed enter in that search box, it would actually trigger the registration process to happen. So prevent default says, yes, I pushed enter, but don't actually trigger the enter to happen. Okay? So this part we don't need. And this is where
This is how you customize it the way it for the page.
say it again.
Will you right click with the mouse and that's how you would customize it?
Similarly, yes. You would use the same methodology. But you would handle the right click event. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Or I think it's the click, and then you have to use the event properties to figure out which button was clicked, and you get into that stuff. But yes. So this is where our Ajax action goes. So if I jump back, actually let's do this. Alert, enter. All right. Ooh. No big deal. Enter. All right. So that's the functionality that we want. So I don't need the alert, but now I need to do my Ajax. So to do that, we have a lot of different options on how to do it. The easiest way to do it is that within jQuery, there's actually a get, because we're doing a get. And there's a get JSON. I don't remember what the get JSON does versus get. There's JSON encoded content. So we'll go get JSON. So what it needs is the URL to the service. Our service lives at url.action, and our action name is, this doesn't work, url dot route URL. How do I want to do that? I can't call it as an action because it's technically not an action. I'm going to treat it as content because it lives at API/session service, right? Now we can do seed equals search box.val. So let me break this here so you can see it all on one screen. And one more parenthesis. That's that. My quote?
Yeah.
Oh, I see it, yeah. Okay, well, if my quote's not complete, then this needs to be moved. So content, and then that goes there. And that goes there. And that goes there. Yes.
Alright. The same quotes. Oh,
It will work, but it gets very confusing, so I always use single quotes whenever I'm mixing. Alright, let me break it down a little bit more. So that's my JavaScript string. That's my ASP.NET goodness. The other half of my string. Oh no, it's good. Visual Studio's just letting me catch up. Alright. So that's the base of my URL, and then whatever's in the search box becomes the other part. Alright. Get JSON, I think, will encode it and convert it to an object. I don't know that for certain. So we'll see what happens. But that's the event that we want to have happen. So then we can say alert results. Let's see what we get back. It should just pop up and say JavaScript object. Oh, I didn't have to do all that. Cancel. J. Yeah. Reload. So we have an object. All right, good. Let's do, instead of doing an alert, we can do console log results. Pull up our Chrome inspector, reload the page again, and J. All right, so what happened here, so this is the response object we got in its entirety, which is fine. And there's a property here called response JSON. It's an array of two objects, and there's the actual JSON text that came back. See that? So what we want to get is we get the result object, and then we want to get the response dot response JSON to get the object we want. So we'll say var JSON data equals results dot response JSON. So we'll write that to the console, reload, clear that, J, enter. Okay. What do I want to do here? This is promise, right? Yeah. Anybody here done Node before? Node.js? So one of the things with JavaScript that you have to recognize early on is that JavaScript is very much an asynchronous language. Basically, it's all based on call an action, get a callback. Call an action, get a callback. So it allows for super hyperscaling of threads and things like that. So you basically spin off these tasks and then you wait for a response. Because of that, what's coming back from get.json is not the result, it is a handler. It's It's basically a notifier where you can check the status on, did I get back what I need? Did it get back? Because what's happening is, remember, the browser is going out, making a connection to the server, and then getting a response back. So that request response is happening right here in this line of code. The browser is spinning up a separate thread, making the call out to the server, and then the server is responding back. Well, it doesn't happen instantly. There are nanoseconds or milliseconds of delay that go in between. And because of that, you have to account for that interaction that happens. So what's coming back, this result object, is actually they call it a callback or an event callback. And then you have to check the state on it. And I didn't cover it a minute ago when I showed you the object, so I'm not going to get into it. But to make your code easily readable, you can actually provide a function that says, hey, when that callback happens, call this function. So there's a function called done that we can chain off of getJSON. And in here, we can provide a function. And I'm going to put results here instead as a parameter. Okay? So I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to kick all this back a line. Or pull that up. And then I'm going to pull this data in here and move that. So what I'm now saying is make this HTTP call to my service, grabbing the value out of the search box. When this call is done, run this little chunk of code, this function. Utilizing the results, get the response JSON, JSON data, and then I'm going to spit that JSON data object out to my console. Let me reload again, just make sure. Okay. So let's backtrack here. Console log results. Oh, it is our JSON. Okay. So basically what's happening here is the result is our JSON data. We didn't get that whole handler object, it just gave us the response JSON right back. So what I'm going to do then to clarify that is I'm going to take JSON data and put it here. And now we're in good shape. So now we have that data. What was that? So once we have the JSON data, then this is where we filter our table. All right. So to filter the table, it's basically 3 steps. Clear current rows, generate a new row, insert rows into the table. Okay. So we say reg table from up here. All right, so that's our registration table jQuery object. Dot find td. No t. Wait. I always bite myself doing this. These are THs, and those are JK. Yeah. So find the TDs, and I think it's clear. No. Remove. Remove. So that takes all the TDs and takes them out. Actually, let's take the TRs. Do we have a T-body tag? TR, TH. I'm going to make a T-body, just so I can isolate my selection easier. That goes down here. T-body outside of the loop. So T-body, TR. So I want to grab all the TRs within the T-body. Okay? And then I want to remove them. Take them out. And then for var I equals 0 less than JSON data dot length, I is less, I'm sorry, where I is less than JSON data length, I plus plus, right? Just basic for loop. And we can do this a few different ways. The most effective way to do it is to say var new HTML, empty string. And then we're going to append new TR tags here. Now we have 4 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 columns. So the first one is the checkbox. Oh, that's going to become interesting. So what we have to do is we have to replicate this HTML in our JavaScript. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to select copy. Paste. That's the wrong one. Copy. Paste. Alright, so I'm going to use that Alt-Shift. Put an open quote at the beginning. I'm going to Alt-Shift again, go back down. I should be able to Shift Tab. Oh shoot, that didn't work. I want to get rid of the white space. Come on. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm trying to clean up this layout because I'm going to start inserting the values that came back from my JSON into here. And this is where the double quote, single quote thing bites you in the butt. Boop. All right. So single quote, single quote, single quote, single quote, single quote. Oh, it is erasing them. Sometimes you got to use the right tool for the right task. And my preferred tool is Notepad++. Come on now. So we'll do that. So where there's a line break, do that plus a line break. Extended mode. Replace all. Alright, there we go. So that's irrelevant. Alright, very good. Copy. Flip back to Visual Studio. So if you're curious what I did here, is in Notepad++, you can do find replace. Search mode is extended to include line break, tab, and a few other / escape sequences. So So basically I said take all the end of line /r/n and then do single quote plus sign /r/n. So I kept my line breaks, but I added a single quote and a plus sign to the end of each line.
It's faster than we type.
So that at least gets me a good portion of the way to where I want to be. You can do it in Visual Studio. It requires writing a regular expression, and then you'll want to just you'll probably spend more time trying to write a halfway decent expression to do it than just doing what I did. All right, so this is our text that will be our HTML markup. So now we have to go through and kind of plug in the values that are needed. So this will be the name, and what I'll say here is JSON data of I.name. I think it's capital plus. So that's a string, right? Let's jump back up here. This is the ID. So this value here of 1 will need to be replaced with JSON data of I.id. All right. Now, something that may not be obvious, the 0 here, that needs to also be replaced. Because potentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert more than one row. In this particular segment of the name with the square bracket, the 0, my JavaScript doesn't care, my HTML doesn't care. My model binder and my ASP.NET really cares because that's what tells me if I have an array of results coming back. If that's not there and those rows aren't unique, then you may get back one item, you may get back no items. So this will be I from our for loop. And I have to do that anywhere I have an indexer. I feel like I'm missing one. That's the ID. Input is selected for name is selected. Check. That's the checkbox. Oh, and that's the hidden. Okay, that's good. Now we don't have session description, occupancy, or room number. So if we want to bring those in, we go back to our view model and we add them. Just stop debugging. And then this is our controller. So then we have to come down to our select and we have to extend that with description, occupancy, or capacity is what I called it here, and room equals x.room. F6. Yeah, I thought that might happen. So we'll call this capacity just to be consistent. We'll auto-create that property. We'll go back here and get rid of occupancy. So what I'm doing is I'm extending the view model so when I make the JSON call, now I get back 5 properties instead of 2. Right? Because this class represents the JSON object that I get back. This change is to make sure that I'm pumping all that data into those view model objects. I'm adding capacity, description, and room. So now I've got all that data presumably flowing. So let me rebuild. Oh, wrong button. All right, well, that's doing that. And that's doing that. Let's go ahead and fill in the rest of these strings. So JSON data I dot description. JSON data I dot capacity. And JSON data I dot room. All right, so we have our new HTML. So we're looping through, creating that new HTML. Yeah. Thank you. So we now create and append that string. So then the last step is regtable.find tbody dot append HTML or new HTML is what we're calling it. This is declared before the loop, so we're good scope-wise. So that's the last step. And then we prevent default. So in theory, what should happen now is that that new row will get appended or inserted into our table. Let me do this. So if I type J, nothing happens.
Look, just .html. Still work.
What are you talking about?
When you append, like at the bottom.
This?
Yeah, is it?
No, because the name of my string up here is new HTML.
I'm saying like what instead of append, isn't it just .html?
We can try that. Usually the append works, but let's give that a shot.
Like .html replaces everything.
Inside of the T body, which would give us the same net result. It would take the new HTML and insert it in. Yeah. Well, we're not even getting that far because at minimum we should be getting rid of our rows. So I'm going to put a debugger statement here, and what that does is if it's supported by the browser will kick in and it'll actually put a debug point there. So let's reload this and see if we even make it that far.
Is it best practice to have inline script tags like that, or having it separate out into a separate JavaScript file?
Inline scripts. Oh, like where I'm putting the code straight in there. It's actually better to put it into a separate JavaScript file, especially for reusability. If it's isolated just within the one page, you can kind of argue back and forth either way. But typically, yes, if it was something that was reusable, obviously you'd want to put it into a separate file. If it's anything extensive, even like more than probably, if we had much more than what we have here, I would definitely move it into a separate file. Sometimes what I do though is I'll code it right in the page, make sure I got it working, and then I'll cut it out. So that way you're not dealing with two logistical issues. I have a feeling what's happening is this is failing. Oh, no, it worked. We got back an array of two objects with all the data, so that's right. So regtable is a result with one item. So if we do regtable tbody tr, let's copy that, pull up the console, paste. So we got back the rows, which is what we want. Maybe remove isn't what we want to call. And this is why you need 2 or more monitors. I totally want to put this on one screen and this on another screen. Where's my step through? What is it? F.